Hello and welcome to Tangledeep. This is a roguelike currently going through early access, and it is very early right now, so if you see any kind of weirdness, I've been experiencing some, that's why. It is in alpha currently, so it's a bit, early. But it has had a couple of updates in the past few days that have fixed some of the bugs that I've been experiencing, which is what I was waiting for to actually record it, because I actually had kind of a bad one yesterday that prevented me from playing at all. That's fixed now, so as you can see I'm actually moving. But this is Tangledeep, and it's actually kind of a neat concept. It's sort of a roguelike that is mixing elements of JRPGs and some kind of CRPG-esque stuff in there as well. It's got a Final Fantasy-esque job system in, and like right now I'm actually a paladin, but down here, where's the button for it? Down here, you've got all these other abilities from other jobs that I've actually learned via playing. And all these came from the previous job that I had, and the way that the system works is it actually encourages you to switch them around and not stick with one job constantly. And you lose a couple of passives by switching, but you gain the ability to learn all of the other skills that the other jobs actually possess, which is kind of neat. And by venturing around and slaying monsters and all that, you will gain these job points, which is how really a lot of other Final Fantasies and the tactic games, I would say Final Fantasy Tactics A2 is what this reminds me of a little bit. It's how those did it, if you've ever played that. And this was kind of hinted at a bit by some of the NPCs, but the idea is that you really do need to switch. If you stay as one job for too long, you're actually kind of gimping yourself a little bit. So every job has these passives. You will begin with one that is unique to that one, and then there are two others, an advanced one that you always get after spending at least 1,000 points as that job, and then a master passive, which you get for buying every skill that job has to offer. And although you can keep every ability, every skill that you purchase from a job, when you switch, you will lose all of these. So I was a swordmaster, which is kind of I suppose a Spellblade style of character, which was pretty cool. As you can see, I have all the swordmaster skills down here. Very Chinese zodiac themed elemental sword wielding, focus on lots of parries and elemental damage. And then I'm now a paladin. And I mean, you can kind of guess how paladin would work. It works basically like you'd think. And you can combine these jobs however you want and switch them around to your own kind of benefit. The only cost is money, so you can just spend gold whenever you have it to switch around. And you can see you have two different skill bars, so I have all my swordmaster skills on this one and all of my one paladin skill here, because I just switched over to it. So we're going to go venturing. This is, by the way, your little hub area. I should explain a couple things here. And you have a sort of farm. It's actually a tree grove with an adorable frog. If you talk to the frog, he'll tell you all about the trees. You can find various types of tree seeds and acorns and the like and plant them here. And over time, through your adventures, the trees will grow and bear fruit, even if it's not what the trees would normally bear. They can actually give you cheese and things like that. Don't question how that works. And every time you come back, if you want, you can check for food. You can also chop the trees down, and it'll give you experience and job points for doing so. That's mainly used for actually planting other trees in its place. And the older they get, the more they're worth. And then over here, you have a very interesting little system. This is the Monster Corral. You can actually, this sort of fox creature here is a monster rancher, good old Jesse, and you can knock creatures down to very low HP, and then use a special item that you can buy here called a monster mallet on them to knock them out and drag them back here. Sounds a little morbid, but you can then groom them and feed them and things like that in order to make them more, well, I suppose, happy. And by doing so, you can actually, well, do a couple of things now, because they've actually changed this in the more recent patches. making them more happy will have them reward you with consumables and things like that, and eventually you can take them out with you as a pet, which is really cool. I don't think I have any monster chow to feed them. You can feed them other stuff, but they really like monster chow. I'm guessing each monster type has its own favorite food as well. And you can buddy them up, well, with yourself, with your character, and go down in the dungeon with them as a pet. And if they die, of course, that's it, they're gone. But you can return them to the corral whenever you want, and eventually you'll be able to make special food to feed them and actually, almost like Pokemon style, mate them with other monsters to get eggs that will contain new monsters that contain the traits of both of the parents, which is a pretty neat concept. And this is really cool. I spent quite a bit of time in this, actually, and is why my last character, who I was going to show you, was much farther along, died. Whoops. I was going to show you some more far along content, but my last character died because of this, so yeah. This is the Ancient Machine. And this is a Disgaea-like item world system, where you can select items that you have and actually go into an item level, a world that is within that item. And if you're able to beat the boss at the end, it will power up the item with certain new upgrades and modifiers and intrinsic abilities and things like that. And you can do this many, many times. I've actually done it once with my main weapon here, this set piece spear. And it needs these orbs and some gold, and then once you select something, you can transmute more gold into a higher chance to get even better stuff. And you can even remove modifiers for a large cost if you want to get a different one on there, if you want to like just really perfect an item. And you've also, as you can see, each one has different affinities and different numbers of floors, different modifiers for what the item world is actually going to be like, so they're different for each item. It's really pretty awesome. I can spend a lot of time in item worlds, and I did a lot of that in Disgaea, so I love that that's here, and it gives you a lot of extra stuff to do beyond the main dungeon. Speaking of which, we should actually get on with it. So, back to the main dungeon. This is where I currently am, in the Fungal Caves. Something I want to explain right off the bat is there's a lot of optional branches and various ways to go. The Fungal Caves is only one of two main ways to travel, and it's basically after the first boss there are two sort of paths that you can take, and in each of those paths there are other small branches and other places you can go. For instance, here I could go up to the 10th floor of the Fungal Caves, or I could go to the first floor of the Flooded Temple. And there's more like that on the other path, which is a sort of bandit castle type of place. I'm going to continue up, which is probably a mistake. Oh, we have a shark. Good. Is this a bad idea? I don't trust that. I don't trust the shark. You know what? I'm just gonna go. I don't. Nope. You can use those campfires to make food and stuff like that. Food is actually very important in this game. You have a lot of consumables you can cook as well. There are cooking recipes that you can find yourself, as in find out yourself by experimenting, or that you can find yourself as loot. And doing that will allow you to make some fancy stuff, like fish and chips. And there's, or the fruit bowl, or pumpkin bread. And a lot of these are just really, really handy. And kind of necessary. Now this is actually a champion, which is a sort of harder version of a normal enemy, which is kind of unlucky to find right off the bat, but here we go. Here's how combat works. Very roguelike-esque, of course, but with a lot of abilities. So I'm going to start off by using that, which will put a damage over time fire field in front of me. Activate my parry, and start smacking him. And combat works very, very well. Oh god. I'm going to do this. Oh, he pulled me back. I have a spear, so I can attack him from farther away, but he can pull me in because of the type of monster that he is, which is rude, but something I'm going to have to deal with. I do have an obscenely powerful attack like that. I could probably use that, but it takes a couple turns to actually go off. Oh, it kind of, that happened. There we go, cleaned up. Now, you have these various resources down here, besides the obvious one, health, stamina, and energy, which is basically like mana, and they actually don't regen on their own. And enemies can drop power-ups when they die. The main way of actually restoring these resources is to find those. Ow. And doing so will restore little bits depending on your stats. There are stats that determine how much each of those power-ups will actually restore. But it's handy. There's the Bandit HQ entrance. Good. It's handy to know how much you need. And I will say that in classic roguelike style, actually trying to make sure you're not using too much, resource management is very important. Okay. So, managing your abilities and your resources is definitely a key part of this game. Another interesting thing is, your main healing doesn't necessarily come from those, the food items. You actually have this flask. It's an almost Estus-like flask. You always have it, and rather than it being consumed, it uses charges, and you can find more charges by finding these fountains across the various places. They're pretty much everywhere. In the dungeon, in item worlds, you can find them all over the place, and they restore a couple charges each time, and you just drink this flask. It doesn't even use a turn like any other items do, and it will heal you up over 5 turns. And there are also flask infusions that you can get, which is pretty neat, where over a certain number of... I'm going to use that to empower the healing. Over a certain number of levels, at level 5 is the first time you can choose one, the flask will gain extra effects. So my flask actually has a citrus infusion, which makes it give me 10% extra attack and defense every time I use it for a short time. Magma chamber, that sounds pleasant. Let's see, I can use this to get close. Oh, get out of the way. A lot of enemies will have those kinds of red zones on the ground for their attacks that say, hey, don't stand here, and you'll need to get out of the way. I'm going to actually activate this. This is a pretty great ability, this Thundering Lion, which lets you build up charges to hit enemies really, really hard. Good with a spear. There we go. And that's a lot of damage. There's a lot of synergies here and a lot of actual class variety. There's a lot of jobs to choose from, and they're, I think, adding more as time goes on. And I do like that it actually does encourage you to try out various jobs and combine them to try and make your own kind of hybrid job. That's basically the best way to play the game. Every time you level up, you get a specific number of stat ups. Your stats increase at a certain amount, and of course the amount they increase is different for every job that you're playing. So you're going to want to do things like trying to understand which jobs synergize well with others for more than just their stats, but also their abilities. I was rooted there. There's one of those magic fountains. And when you should switch, it feels a bit like this Gaia in that regard, actually. I do like the combination of JRPG and kind of CRPG-esque mechanics that's going on here. Oh god, a king. The variety and extra effects that enemies can have is also pretty impressive. One thing I would really like to see, though, well, first of all, a Dark Knight job. Seriously, give me a Dark Knight job. I want that. That'd be awesome. That would be really, really great. I think the game design in general could benefit from that a lot. I would love to see that. Oh no. Dark Knight would be sweet. A Dark Knight-esque job, of course. This isn't Final Fantasy, it just has a lot of jobs that are reminiscent of jobs from FF. However, I would also like to see on the level up screen little numbers that tell you which stats went up by how much on a level up, because right now the level up screen just shows you your stats, and then you can choose one to put an additional 3 points in on top of how they naturally go up for each level. But it doesn't actually tell you which ones go up by how much. You have to sort of keep track of that yourself, you know? It'd be nice to actually know more specifically, just to put like a little +1 and +3 next to each one to show you how much each one increased. I would like that. Oh, I don't have 35 stamina. I don't like that. Well, how about, let's try that. A lot of the attack animations and things are pretty nice. I like them quite a bit, and the actual sprite work looks great as well, I think. Rude. And the world design is pretty cool as well. The levels that you go through are pretty different, and each place does definitely look quite different. Some of the enemy designs as well are pretty fun. There are like giant robot crabs and things later on. As you can see, there are actual robots. Why not? Oh, no. No, that didn't work. Got disarmed. Ow. I'm gonna do this. So, I think Tangledeep is a pretty good package so far. There is, I think, a lot to be done, of course, but what's here so far is enjoyable, for sure. And has a fair bit of longevity to it as well, especially because of things like the item world system and all that. That's really cool. And the boss encounters are well designed and actually quite difficult. And the first one killed me like twice before I figured out my third character how to get it going properly. And like I said, I really like the job system. I like the addition of all of the... There we go. Still some UI problems. The addition of the, you know, you should mix in hybrid jobs and things like that to make it a little cooler. Always up for that. I would maybe, if I was to go for some other suggestions, because, you know, early access suggestions, I would like to see maybe, besides a Dark Knight job, something like the UI down here. Actually, if I show you all of these, all of the foods that have a duration, like how long they take, it tells you over 5 turns, over 6 turns, for 12 turns, all of those have the duration displayed. However, things like this, this lasts a certain amount of time, but it doesn't tell you, like, temporarily, for instance. This is actually like 4 turns-ish, but it doesn't, it just doesn't tell you that, and none of the actual skills actually tell you their duration in the tooltip, and I think that would be a very valuable thing to know. So I feel like all the tooltips should actually show you their durations in them, especially because if you look here, the discipline stat, buff duration. So it seems to me like if you, even if you were to memorize what all of your buffs actually do and how long they take, like for instance I memorized that all of my spell shaper buffs were, the auras were 12 turns. But if you get enough discipline from levels and gear, eventually that's actually going to change. So it would be nice if the tooltips actually told you exactly how many turns they lasted. I would also, if I was to maybe suggest like something more major, some sort of different, more interesting change to the mechanics, I would like to see skill variants. I think it'd be really cool to see some kind of mutually exclusive variations on the skills themselves. So, like, eventually if you could find something, like a skill book or something like that, that allowed you to learn an advanced version of each of your skills that had some sort of extra effect on it. Like, say, you could find a book that taught you one of 2 variants of this skill, the Wild Horse skill, that lets you lunge at an enemy. And you can only choose one of them. And one of them might, say, bleed the enemy when it hit them, or the other one might have a significantly increased range. Or maybe an advanced version of the Flame Serpent would have more of a T-shaped, like an extended T-shaped range. So it would extend out this way a little bit. It would have these 3 and then like 2 out this way, so it would have a better range. Or a different one would be that it did like more amplified fire damage. They could have a kind of specialization, and you would need to be that class to actually read the job manuals to actually figure out the advanced versions of the abilities. I think that would be an interesting idea because it gives you the first stage of the game is actually learning the job's abilities. The second stage would be to hybridize it with another job to come up with something unique and interesting. And the third stage would be finding these manuals and like super upgrading each of your skills to create like a unique build. I think that could be a very interesting way to do things. Also, what's pretty cool to me is that the developer of Dungeon Mans, which is a roguelike that I really enjoyed, is actually on the team now for this game, which can only mean good things, because that was a fantastic game. So I'm definitely looking forward to what he brings to the table as well. Oh, hi there. So yeah, this is the current state, a little look, at least, at the current state of Tangledeep. It is actually a very interesting little thing. It's got, I think, a lot of potential, and I'm about to die. And I think there's quite a bit to be done still, of course, because it is very early. But what's here is actually pretty enjoyable. It's $15 on Steam, if you wish to know. And I'll link you in the description below to actually check it out. All the extra systems like pets and the farm, corralling monsters, doing the item world and things like that add a lot of extra longevity to the game, and there is some really interesting loot to find as well, including set items and legendaries and stuff like that, which I honestly have not done a good enough job of showing you what some of the cool stuff is. There's a lot of actually really neat bonuses and cool stuff on the loot. A lot of it isn't just incremental stat upgrades, some of it has some very cool effects and special abilities and things, which is neat. Also, there are flails, so that's automatically pretty cool. So yeah, Tangledeep, do check it out. It is very promising, actually, and I always like taking a look at more commercial roguelikes when they come up on Steam, so there you go. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.